we need to continue to challenge ourselves as human beings. And these are just new tools to help attack bigger problems that we couldn't attack without the tools. That is the joy of working in this industry, trying to figure out how to make real problems go away and climb new mountains that we've been looking at that are way too far off. Suddenly they're not as far off as they might have seemed before.
We often think of technology as something that sits outside of us, an object, a tool, a screen. But what if it's actually within us? What if the world we've built around us is alive with connection, a nervous system pulsing beneath everything we touch? Today on Sense Making Conversations, I'm joined by Dr. John Mitchell, President and CEO of the Global Electronics Association, where he leads global operations and helps shape the strategic vision for one of the most vital industries on the planet. Since joining them in 2012, John has guided the organization through rapid change, championing innovation, strengthening supply chains, and helping countries understand why electronics are now essential to growth and resilience. From the devices we hold to the hospitals that keep us alive, from the supply chains that feed us to the satellites that connect us, electronics have quietly become the infrastructure of human life. In this conversation, we explore how electronics evolved from parts and circuits to the nervous system of modern civilization, why innovation without stewardship breaks the nervous system that sustains us, and what it's going to take to design technology that connects us and protects us. If you've ever wondered what keeps our world running and what happens if and when it stops, this conversation will change how you see the future. I'm Andrea Sampson, and this is Sense Making Conversations. I've been working with you for some time, and I know lots about what you do and what the Global Electronics Association does, but maybe you can give us a little bit of behind the scenes. Give us, a peek behind the curtains. Who is John Mitchell? What is this thing called the Global Electronics Association?
The Global Electronics Association is a trade association for this little industry that you may have heard of called the electronics industry. If you're listening to this, you're using it and you didn't know it. If you use the internet, if you use AI, if you use a phone, if you take a plane, if you drive a car, if you eat food, somewhere electronics is impacting your life. And so the Global Electronics Association is really about helping the industry continue to grow and then strengthening the global supply chain that makes it all possible at its highest level. So that's a very simple answer to your question. Who am I? Nobody, just a regular guy. I wanted to joke about, how I got involved with the association. And when I was in third grade, this epiphany hit me that I needed to lead the world of electronics. And that, no, I'm kidding. I had no idea until about 2 years before I took this role that it even existed. And so association work is kind of behind the scenes for most of the world, and very important work, but it does, kind of run behind the scenes. My background, I started off as an electrical engineer. From there, got a degree in business, all the while working in industry in various aspects, creating cool stuff, like I had some product development for Bose. I helped build an intermittent wiper proposal for Honda cars back in the day. I built a head unit back in like 1992. If you had a 1992 Honda Civic, I designed that radio, I have patents in navigation systems. That's what we used to call them back in the day. Now everybody just refers to it as their GPS app. So I've had a great opportunity. I then got a doctorate in education. Education has always been a passion in my life, and it's one of the things that the Global Electronics Association does. So we do very technical work. We provide standards in terms of design and manufacturing and building and making sure that all of your electronics work the way they're intended to work. We also educate. We credential over 150,000 people around the world every single year. Think about a graduating class of a university. They may graduate a few thousand. Well, we do 150,000 people every single year, over and over in multiple languages, et cetera. We do advocacy as well. So I have the opportunity to work with governments, whether it's in DC, Brussels, Beijing, Tokyo, you name it, because governments impact that supply chain we were talking about. So that's kind of my background that led me to this, working in industry, as well as now I work on behalf of industry.
Your background is interesting. It's like, prepared you for exactly what you're doing as an engineer, as someone who has always been curious about electronics. Here you are leading the Global Electronics Association, which is, requiring a lot of leadership right now. Let's face it. The world is changing quite dramatically. You nailed it at the beginning. Like if you're listening to this on some device, if you are driving a car, if you have a pacemaker or a hearing aid, these are all forms of electronics, and when we think about it, the industry has only been around less than 100 years.
I don't know. You can count Ben Franklin, right, and his key with lightning. Maybe that was the beginning of the electronics industry.
And I mean, yeah, like it's such a short I don't even
Yeah,
know, that
it's
was a
short for sure. I mean, really, you started seeing things with Edison, Tesla. You get a lot of very cool historical figures across, frankly, all over the world.
but, I mean, and it really did change. It changed the way we work because suddenly we didn't have to stop when the sun went down. It changed the way that we socialize and interact. It changed our bedtimes. It changed everything.
The interaction, I think, is interesting socially as well. I mean, think about it. For the longest time, we as humanity knew our neighbors and maybe the local town folk, right? And now you have conversations across the globe in real time, and some of our best friends may be living anywhere. All of that has come about through innovation. And really, I look at electronics as the source of upcoming innovation for literally every single industry.
As quick as it has been that it's become embedded in our world, it's getting even more. I mean, you and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, and I told you I just got my new robot vacuum. Charlie, my robot vacuum, who I can hear downstairs is working away. This brings us into the world of the Jetsons, right? We have access to technology at all times. We're walking around with screens like they did in Star Trek. We are living in a moment where not so long ago was considered the distant future, and yet we're living it today. And we're forming relationships with our technology. How's that impacting us as humans? What do you think on that?
Let me regress just for a minute. When I was a kid, I read a lot of science fiction, Heinlein, Niven, all that, lots of just classical sci-fi stuff. And by then we were talking about the year 2000s, like, oh, we'll have flying cars and, interstellar space travel and all of that stuff. It's taking, in my view, yes, it's fast, but I really wanted it a lot faster. We're getting there. AI is coming along. It's starting to actually, as opposed to just being the great repeater of averages, there are other, applications that after we're in, I think the end of this month is the 3-year anniversary of generative AI, right? I think it was November 30th, 2022. So we're just 3 years into this. And yet there's so much investment. It's changing how we think, how we do things, how we educate. I talked about education being a critical part of what the Global Electronics Association does with our IPC certification, et cetera. Well, there's a new way of thinking about education. It's not like, oh, I need to go off and have a course. It's really a restructuring of how we learn things. We can't just sit there and say, oh, I don't need to know that because ChatGPT does, because you need to be able to structure the questions well enough to get better, innovative, stronger answers. Using it like Google is the poor man's way of using ChatGPT.
I always like to say, answers are easy. It's questions that are hard. The better the question that we ask AI, of course, not only do we get a better answer, but we actually get more questions, right? Because when we ask a good question, it creates more questions, deeper questions.
I love asking AI for the right questions.
But you know what? It's not good at it.
And it's an iterative process. I mean, I look at it, I think about it back in the, we were talking about, historically, what was life like versus what is it like today. I remember some of my fondest memories is sitting in a room and just talking, and it spurs ideas. I see one of the great advantages is people can do that not just remotely, but they can create those personas that ask different questions based on a historical body of literature, where you can sit there and say, hey, as Albert Einstein, if I were doing this, or as, Bill Gates, leveraging the body of work that so and so has produced, I'd like to discuss this topic. And it's almost like you create your own living room of experts that you can then spur ideas off of it. And to me, that is a larger value than expecting it to create new ideas.
And I think that that's key, right? Because, as one of the many AIs that I use reminds me regularly, is that it is not a mind, it's a mirror. And I think that that's an important distinction because it isn't a mind. What it's doing is it's mirroring back to us what humanity has given it so far, what we have created. And that's what we do is we are creators. We think creatively, we act creatively. That's where innovation comes from. And when we look at electronics, that innovation, that mindset, that fixer, builder, problem solver mindset, which has the ability to ask good questions and then go out and figure out the answers, is what allowed us to tap into generative AI in the first place. And so here we are today with these powerful, powerful tools and with a great opportunity to do nothing with them, right? Because we can sit back now and go, great, we don't have to do anything. Let's just let them do it all. But there's more to be created. And, I've heard you say that electronics are really the nervous system of our future. What do you mean by that in practical terms?
If you think about all the various industries out there, we're like the nervous system or a subterranean industry, right? Because we cut across so many things and you don't really see us, whether you're AI or agriculture, whether you're aerospace or automotive. Electronics are that innovative blood that are happening going through there. And today's world, especially after COVID, people became very aware of the semiconductor portion of the electronics ecosystem, if you will. And it's a great part and it's important, it's critical. However, the coolest chip in the world doesn't do anything until you put it into a system that does something. And that's really what the Global Electronics Association is about. We're about creating systems and bringing all those sub pieces together, those subsectors, if you will, and working together as a system that delivers on the promise, that we can do more. We've talked about this before in some of my keynotes. I'll talk about water is necessary for life. Fossil fuels were necessary for the Industrial Revolution. And now electronics are the lifeblood of innovation in the future across literally every industry. Just like water and fossil fuels touched every industry, so are electronics now.
You know what I find interesting when we talk about innovation, and of course, both you and I are such students of history and science fiction, and looking backward to look forward. And when I think back to innovation as a concept, and looking at when we really started using electronics in an innovative way, we go back to like the 50s. They were having the World's Fair with the kitchen of the
I
future,
know
or
neither of us
the
actually remember that, but yes.
yeah, we've read about it. Uh, but you know, in those days, when those leaders were envisioning where innovation would take us, it was convenience, right? We were moving out of having to do everything manually. So rather than walking to, wherever we needed to go, we could drive. Rather than washing our clothes on a washboard or, cranking some sort of a device, we were now having some form of an electronic machine do that for us. So it was convenience. But at some point, innovation moved from convenience into survival. And now we see innovations today, they're not about convenience anymore. We've moved into the world of survival when we look at what's happening.
Charlie would disagree.
True, true. But that same technology is being used in science, in medicine, even in space travel. And so what do you think kind of motivated that? Why at what point did we shift?
This is the greatest thing about what I get to do now. I mean, I work with a lot of students across the world and they're all like, oh, what should I do? Is AI taking my job? Or, where should I be going? And and frankly, there are very, very few people I've ever met that knew, as I was joking about, as a third grader, knew what their path was and followed that path. I encourage them not to get too stressed out about that. But when I talk to them, I used to sit there and say, well, we're not curing cancer. Well, actually, we are. I mean, we're doing electronics are making the difference in the medical industry, in life or health span. The phrase we've heard come out in the last few years about it's not about lifespan, it's about health span. Well, technology helps, it measures things like that. It gives us feedback to help us make better choices. It tells us, put the candy bar down, so it's better feedback to help us again become better at who we are, have a longer, healthier life, make a stronger impact on society. I mean, we all want to have a better life. And that better life is in spite of what I see in some whatever they call them, influencers. The goal in life is not to sit back in a fancy car or at the beach for the rest of our lives and do nothing. You atrophy, you become uninterested and uninteresting. So we need to continue to challenge ourselves as human beings. And these are just new tools to help strive to attack bigger problems that we couldn't attack without the tools. That is the joy of working in this industry, the excitement of literally being on the forefront of trying to figure out how to make real problems go away and climb new mountains that we've been looking at that are way too far off. But suddenly they're not as far off as they, might have seemed before. And yes, that's scary because it means that we're changing too. I mean, if we think about the life that we live today versus, you were talking about the 1950s, very different, set of problems, very different set of opportunities. And some people wish it wouldn't have changed, obviously, but at the same time, there are roles that will change as well, so that if you're doing a job that can be replaced by AI, that can be scary. Um, but the idea is to build multiple skills so that AI becomes one of the skills that you're able to leverage in problem solving. But it can be scary as because changes.
Yeah, change is scary. And I think what I'm hearing in your answer is that when we look back at the way in which innovation has unfolded over time, the reality is electronics has given us better and better and better tools. And so as we've gotten these better tools, we've applied them to different things. It started with convenience because as humans we like convenience. But then it moved into these areas that got into our health and wellness and our ability to interact with each other and then beyond. And like you said, in today, it's into the very jobs that we do. And of course, we're all aware of the headlines that talk about how AI is going to eliminate jobs. And I think one of the things that is really powerful in what you said is that it isn't about the elimination of jobs. It's actually about understanding how to use this tool so that we do our jobs differently and better. What we're talking about is iterations, right? Innovation is iterative and it gives us little bits and we adopt it. And like you said, as humans, we don't like change. And so the adoption can be difficult. But once we've adopted it, and certainly on the 3-year anniversary of generative AI, we are in the place of full adoption that we're seeing. But what we haven't done yet is said, okay, well, now that we've adopted this new tool, what is our innovation and how is it going to help us in ways that we can't imagine? We're in exponential times. We know this, right? It's moving very, very quickly. So part of it isn't just about how we use these tools, but how we steward them responsibly. And I know that that's something you think a lot about within the work you do because so much of what global electronics does is it is a steward within the industry. So tell me a little bit more about that and how do you think about stewardship so that we can ensure that progress isn't outpacing purpose?
Great, great question. And it's a never ending challenge, right? Through any innovation. Let me start by answering that question with a word that you mentioned just now, which is iterative. Let me use an example that many people might be able to relate to. Let's take automobiles, for instance. There was a time when the engines really didn't work very well. It was a time when I remember we got our first electric windows and my mother swore she would never use them because they were unreliable. She wanted a crank that could physically allow her to roll up that window. And the electronics initially maybe weren't that robust and the cars weren't that robust. But lately, if you're driving around in a car for the last, I want to say 20 years, but easily the last 5 years, do you think about whether the engine's going to work or not? It doesn't even enter into it. we've iterated over decades to improve out all of these concerns that we've had in piece here. The same can be said in terms of AI. There are challenges in electronics, absolutely. In terms of people throwing away their phones and e-waste, that's an issue we need to work on and solve, and we will, and we're working on it today. That's one of the ways that, you talk about how do we maintain that responsibility? What are the things that we're working on? Well, we're working on sustainability, energy, the consumption of energy with AI and chips is astronomical. People are literally licensing out nuclear power plants to power server farms, but we're working on that. History has proven this out. So this is why I have great faith in it. Back to that same automotive example, back in let's just say the early 80s, your car stereo electronics cost, about, I don't know, $1,000. Let's just make up a figure to put in the car. And the car at that time might have cost $10,000. Well, today, that same vehicle costs $50,000, yet the electronics in it to do that radio are probably a few pennies. And so that same functionality has gotten very compressed, very efficient. So electronics always finds a way to get more efficient, more cost effective. And so I have great confidence in our industry to solve these problems. Are they problems? Absolutely. Do we work on them? Yes, we are. Will we solve it? You betcha. Do I know what those answers are today? Absolutely not. But I see work that's going in those directions. I see little tidbits and I'm like, ooh, that's exciting. That could go there and that changes things there and heat drops with this and ooh, ah. So there's just a lot going on. And I've drinking the Kool-Aid. I am, with my electrical engineering degree, what was the old joke? You can't spell geek without the double E. So I'm a geek. I love that stuff. And so far, the industry has not disappointed.
You're showing that stewardship, right? That it is about constantly seeing the industry from that 50,000-foot viewpoint of going, we're moving in the right direction. We're doing the work. Yes, we iterate. We start off with something that is very not very reliable, costs a lot of money, but that does the job. And then we focus on the job at hand and we bring it down in cost, we bring it up in reliability, and eventually it becomes ubiquitous within our world. And that has been true, and that is what electronics as an industry has done. But the industry is highly fragmented. And again, if I go back in time, it probably was much simpler, but it's become more and more complex over time.
They talk about the electronics industry and the electronics ecosystem or supply chain as being the most complex supply chain in the world. It's constantly shifting. You have tariff impacts, you have regulatory impacts. It's constantly changing. Innovation then upends things that you think are staples of it, and suddenly it's gone.
And this was the risk, right? With a fragmented industry that has a complex supply chain. As a general population, I think when we think of electronics, we mostly just think of the devices that we're carrying around. We're not thinking about all of the pieces that go into those devices to make them work. And even if we did, I'm not sure that anyone would really think about it as one industry because it feels like it's many different things. But yet that is what you focus on is all of that. And I can only imagine how challenging that must be because it's everything from, chip production to, understanding the
Wires
current that goes
and
through it. Yeah.
chemicals and the machines that help put all that together and the boards that hold the stuff, the assembly guys that really have to figure out how to make all that stuff come together and work as a system. And then you take that and multiply it by every region and then multiply it by every industry and it just gets really interesting.
So how do you harmonize that? And I mean, today we're talking about this planet, but I mean, look, I know of different entities out there that were looking at mining asteroids and like we're even going beyond because those precious metals are actually they're mining them not because we're going to make jewelry with them, but because we're going to make electronics with them.
This is how geeky I am. It never even occurred to me that jewelry would be an option. Like, of course we're doing that for electronics. What are you talking
Right.
about? Yeah.
And so how do you harmonize that? In your role as the CEO of the Global Electronics Association, that's a big purview. And it's I come back to that word stewardship because
We're not like, we're not forcing anybody. The industry actually is a great industry. A wonderful industry to be part of. We literally act as the conveners of the industry. The industry is working on these problems. We generate these standards, but really they're industry standards. We provide this education. Well, the industry tells us what we need to be educating, on, and then, provide that in terms of the policies and procedures. The industry is coming together to make that. We are kind of shepherds herding the masses in the direction that is going to help us solve those problems, but literally without the entire industries pulling and supporting, whether it's the engineers or the executives or the sustainability experts or whatever it may be, the various groups, because it touches so many things. Obviously we can't do everything, so we start somewhere, right? And we try to provide harmony, in terms of standards is a great place to start, whether it's a new process that allows people to adopt things faster, or a more tried and true actual standard based on more data and historical information. Starting there is a great place to start. But then we take a couple of the big ones and we say, okay, let's go work on those with industry. And industry kind of tells us what those are. It's not like we make up the agenda. We're an association of the industry. Our members come forward and say, hey, John, or any one of the different areas that they're working on, there's a problem here. Can you help? If there's enough of the industry that says, yeah, that's what we need to be working on, that becomes a priority and we focus on it. And when we get that harmonized, kind of flowing, then we work on the next one. There's obviously you're doing some work on a lot of things, but you have to pick priorities.
there's 2 things I heard in there that I wanna come back to. I mean, I really love the reframing of stewardship to convener because I think that's important. Convener being, look, what you're doing is creating the environment for, bringing others together in such a way that there's an environment for problem solving on a specific challenge or a specific thing that needs to be discussed, and I think that's key because in a fragmented industry as large as electronics, touching as much as electronics, no one can be an expert in all of those things, but there are experts in each one of them. And so bringing those experts together is the key piece. But what I hear in that is 2 things. One is that, when we look at electronics on this planet, there is a role to play in terms of sustainability. And you talked a little bit about that, right? Electronics has been accused of being, one of the biggest harmers of our planet in many ways. But then the other side of that is the supply chain issue. So on the one hand, we're talking about sustainability. How do we just become better global citizens and make sure that the work we're doing is helping and not harming? But on the other side, how do we deal with this complexity of a supply chain and the global aspects of that when we're living in not just a fractured ecosystem, but a fractured world where tariffs and other challenges are hurting us? So tell me a little bit about the pressures of those 2 things within the industry, and what do we need to know about that?
I mean, like any industry, I think we've continued to improve it. Again, go back to the iterative word, right? If I rewind 40 years, the factories were a different thing than what they are today. I mean, right now, if they're heavy water users, they'll take it in and they keep it in and they recycle it within. They don't have to take it in again, or when they put it out, it's actually cleaner than when they brought it in. They're actually really good actors on some of that front. Can we do better in terms of the reusability and things like that? Absolutely, and we're working on those things. You saw, how do we unify connectors? Or it's just a simple example, but how do we account for what happens with the device? How do we make sure it has, longer life or reusability or second purpose? Is another way to think about it. I think about the automotive industry. When I lived in Japan, a certain car after I forget how many years, but it wasn't many. It's like 5-year old or something. You're not allowed to drive it anymore, basically. But then they repurpose those and bring them to other parts of the world where they can't use those cars. And so, similar to, I think there's opportunities like that for electronics where, you know, um, I happen to be working with a program with some people in the industry where we're trying to provide laptops to Africa where they need the laptops. Well, most businesses today have a 3-year life cycle on their laptops, and then they're using a later one. Well, we can take those and we can provide them in many ways. They're still very good for lots of things, and people can learn and develop their skills via the laptop. So those are the kinds of things that I'm excited for. But, I always joke with people that I look forward to the day that when I'm done with my phone, I can just eat it and be done, that's pretty recyclable, at that point. I don't think we're going there, well, I should never say never. I once had a head of the physics department, and I posed a question to him, and he's like, "I want to tell you that that's impossible, never happened, but as soon as I do, somebody will figure it out." And so that's the excitement of the industry. But there is an opportunity for us to get better, and we're working on that every step of the way. So everybody's working toward net zero on their factories. They're working toward, better social engagements with, their employees on a worldwide basis and reporting on those things. They're working toward better governance. It impacts, and frankly, we saw a recent survey came out from the UN with, I think it was over 2,000 CEOs talking about the actual financial benefits of investing in sustainability going forward. And so it's not going away. We're getting better as a people, as a world, saying, yeah, this is the right thing to do. We're going to do it. I think the orders may be a little flipped. I think our chief technology officer, Matt Kelly, was recently quoted in an article, and I loved what he said. He said, companies don't sit there and go out and say, most companies, I should say, they don't sit there and say, I want to go make the world a better place. So I'm going to change everything I'm doing. They're going to say, hey, by changing what I'm doing, I'm going to save money. It's going to be more profitable, and I get to make the world a better place. And so you combine these business goals with that.
Yeah, and that's key. I mean, we're starting to see businesses, especially even in more emerging technologies, these large data centers as an example, which, they can be seen as being the enemy, or they can come in a different way and be seen as being a good friend. And really the difference is whether they're choosing to look at how they come into that community and support the community. Can they do something with excess energy creation through sustainable means that they offer to the community? Or can they provide excess heat to community resources for homeless, or maybe for, community centers? Like you said, we're not asking them to change their business practices per se for making the world a better place. We're asking them to change their business practices so that they can be better corporate citizens, make more money, and make the world a better place.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
and. I think about the changes. So let's take like these server farms and the energy pulls on it. So everybody's like, oh my gosh, where's the energy coming from? The infrastructure can't support that. Well, this is also an opportunity. Our infrastructure, mostly around the world, pretty antiquated, could use an update. And so here's our opportunity. We're much smarter than we were 75 years ago when we started laying this stuff out. There's cost to it, obviously, but there's an upside on the other side.
And let's come back to the other part of the question, which was supply chain and sort of what is the impact? I mean, I'm here in Canada. We're constantly hearing about more tariffs on our products. And I know that that's happening globally, and it does impact supply chain. What is it that people don't understand about the electronic supply chain and the impact of tariffs? What is it that we need to know so that we can maybe be more
Yeah.
prepared?
So the reality of the situation is the electronic supply chain is global. So I don't care what country you are, whether you're China, the US, it doesn't really matter. If you build walls around it today, you better get used to using your phone for the next 10 years. And now, could we make some tomorrow? Absolutely, in any one of those countries. But China is the largest importer of components. So they don't have them all. We import a lot of stuff in the United States. It is a very complex beast. And so tariffs and COVID, frankly, help highlight just how fragile, dynamic that supply chain is. And so any one of these rocks in a pond creates ripples. Now, we've been having a lot of ripples lately. You've got a war in Ukraine, you've got, trade and tariffs happening here. We had COVID happen there. Whatever those things are that go on, we're getting better at dealing with the ripples, frankly. There's pros and cons to everything that happens. And always try to find the positive in it as well. Yes, yes, there are very negative impacts from tariffs and trade embargoes and things like that, whatever you may have. And the unknown causes a lot of cost and a lot of inefficiency on the electronics industry. So literally Every time there's an idea of a new train, something or other, the customer base goes reaches out to the entire supply chain and say, "What's the impact of this? How do I need to change?" And there's a frenzy. And guess what doesn't happen then? Other work. And so there is a cost to every single one of these changes that is implemented. There's also some benefits. So if I go back to, it's too early to tell kind of what the trade impact benefits are from this current Trump administration. But let's go back to the first Trump administration. Put a lot of pressure on China, and China was primarily the only source in many cases. Well, we saw that, some of the work move out of China and it moved into Southeast Asia, it moved into Mexico, et cetera. So that's fairly healthy for a supply chain to have, alternative opportunities to get your supply chain. Now, if we had 57 alternatives, that's terribly inefficient and not really healthy for a supply. So it's like the old fairy tale, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? Is like this one's too hot, that one's too cold. How do we get it just right? And supply chain is kind of like that. And so we're constantly having to flex. If you're making, I'm using too many different bizarre illustrations that aren't connected, but suddenly making cookies came to mind. I was creating some oatmeal butterscotchies the other day. And if you turn on the mixer just right, it mixes it beautifully. Turn it on too fast, the stuff starts flying everywhere. So too much change is a problem. No change also doesn't mix the cookies at all, So there has to be a balance.
What I've heard from you here is that when we look at electronics, this massive infrastructure that is really the nervous system, the scaffolding for humanity today, it really is, as I hear you talk, it's not one thing, it's an ecosystem. It's not an industry, it's a group of different organizations coming together equally to create something. And what I think is so promising and so important for our listeners to take away is that it isn't an ecosystem that doesn't have stewardship. The convener, that's what global electronics is doing today. And I think that's important because it gets really hard for anyone, even companies, to go, well, then how do we help? How do we create change? How do we look at that supply chain and be comfortable that it's being managed? And I think it's important that we know there is a convener in place. So I guess the last question that then I have for the convener of the ecosystem is we talk a lot about technology, but what about the humans? How do we bring more humanity into this?
So I feel like humanity's already part of it. It's not like as much as some of us electrical engineers are viewed as a little bit like robots, we're humans. And so we think about the same things. The people designing this, the people coming together, they live in the same streets as everybody else. Their kids are going to the same schools. They're traveling in the same way. And so the people that are developing this stuff are also human. So I feel like the humanity of the electronics industry is innate. Sustainability is, yeah, it happens to be a profitable way to go as well, but it's also a pretty human thing to do. Let's take care of this planet. We still right now only have the one. And similarly, we're trying to build capabilities. As the Global Electronics Association, one of the ways that we give back into the humanness of it is training and building skills and creating capabilities so people have a great opportunity to work in a fulfilling industry. They may get a degree, they may not get a degree. There's certifications and trainings that we're able to offer on behalf of the industry that help them better prepare for new jobs, new opportunities, and all of that is human.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think the industry, where we're hearing out in the world that we're seeing jobs lost, I think it's the opposite within this ecosystem. There's new jobs to be had, right? And the industry needs help there, right? From the humans who are hopefully being
There are
retrained.
jobs available. We need people with the right skill sets all over the world. Every country is looking to hire good people with the right talents. And you need some AI skills as part of that. You need, some diverse background. So it's kind of like people think about, Steve Jobs when he and Wozniak started up Apple computers, right? Back in the day. Well, Jobs' vision, some of that came from his diverse background, calligraphy, right? He had a fascination with that. So that changed, he recognized, that opportunity that Xerox had and pulled it into the Apple computers. There's a lot of that that I think we could learn from today. Follow some of those just oddball impressions. Hey, let me go take a cooking class. How does that apply to electronics? I don't know yet, but it might and it could, Go figure out how to paint a mural, on your ceiling by hand. Uh, and see what you learn from that and how that changes people or what you do. It doesn't only have to be technical. You need some technical skills. You got to have some math, and you got to have, know some science, to do certain jobs. But there's other jobs in the industry as well, just having a love for it. You can do marketing without knowing how to solve a differential equation. And that's very important to, try to communicate in this industry and every industry. I guess I would just say if you want to figure out why should I care about electronics, the answer really is because it's affecting you. It's affecting how you live today, whether you recognize it or not. It's keeping your apartment steady at whatever temperature. It's keeping your car, running smoothly. It's allowing you to communicate through your phone. It's making sure that, planes land safely. So understanding that that's important and then learning a little bit about it so you can figure out, hey, what do I need to know about this for my industry and how it might help me even more?
John, this has been fascinating. I've loved all of what you've shared here today, and you've helped us get to know this industry a little bit better and understand a bit about how it is impacting us. Is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Let me just leave it with our new vision as the Global Electronics Association. It's all about better electronics for a better world. And we're striving to make the world a better place through electronics.
And how can our guests keep in touch with you and follow what you're up to these days?
Electronics.org. Come on out and check it out. You can learn more about the ecosystem. You can see, how we're working on sustainability issues. You can see how we're developing standards and all kinds of activities. If you're looking for a job, you can go to our foundation site, especially if you're looking for a new career. What kind of careers are available? There's a great site called Careers in Electronics that walks through, I think it's like 60 different jobs in electronics. What do you need to do it? It has video interviews. It's a fantastic way to learn more about how do I get involved in the industry.
Oh, that's fascinating. I think, you know what? So helpful for so many people. Thank you, John. This has been such a pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time today. What John showed us today is that electronics aren't just tools or technologies, they've become the connective tissue of our modern life. They power how we live, how we work, how we travel, and even how we heal. They've become the heartbeat inside of our hospitals, the signal behind our communications, and they're an invisible thread that keep our world running. And when that thread frays, it isn't just devices that stop working, it's everything that we know, including trust that breaks along with it. Electronics are something we don't often think about, and yet, without them, we would be living very different lives. So here are a few things that I'm taking away from today's conversation. First, electronics are that hidden infrastructure within our society. They're as essential as water or energy or even breathing. And that means our progress can't be measured only by speed or innovation. Rather, it's how responsibly we're designing, sustaining, and protecting these technologies because they now sustain us. And it's important that we have stewardship, overseeing and convening this ecosystem so that we can think ahead and ensure that what's being built today is reliable, ethical, and resilient, and will be so into the foreseeable future. Next, it's connection that creates responsibility. As our devices, data, and supply chains become more and more and more entwined, one failure can ripple across all of our industries and our borders. We saw that a few years ago as supply chains were challenged. But today, it means that every design choice, every sourcing decision, and every policy continues to matter even more. And what's needed are those clear standards, cooperation, and a shared commitment to building technologies that we can rely on, and technologies that protect people as much as they empower them. And finally, the human element is still at the center of everything. Because behind every circuit and supply chain, it's the people who make it all work. Engineers, technicians, teachers, leaders. It's their knowledge, creativity, and care that determine how electronics perform, but more importantly, how they serve society. As we continue to automate, we can't forget that it's the human infrastructure, the very workforce that drives electronics, that are giving technology its meaning. And so finally, what John reminded us today is that the future of electronics is actually the future of humanity. It's how we connect, it's how we collaborate, and how we care for the systems that now connect us and care for us all. And this is the heart of sense-making conversations, caring and connecting in a world of complexity so we can make better choices. This podcast exists to explore complexity with clarity, to help us lead, create, and respond from a place of deep humanity, even as those systems around us grow faster and more intricate. If this conversation sparked something in you, share it with someone who's shaping the future in their own way. And don't forget to subscribe to Sense-Making Conversations, because these are the voices that are helping us make sense of what comes next in our world. Thanks so much for listening. This has been Sense-Making Conversations, and I'm Andrea Sampson. Until next time.